All right, y'all, welcome back to Anti-War Radio. It's Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas. I'm Scott Horton, and our first guest today is Greg Palast. He's an investigative reporter, author of The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, and the book Armed Madhouse. He's got a new one out. It's a comic book done with Ted Rall, Lloyd Dangle, Lucas Kettner, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's called Steal Back Your Vote. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Hey, they've already stolen it, so you got to steal it back. What can I say?
Yeah, so let's talk about this. First of all, my vague understanding is that the Republicans are much better at all this election fraud than the Democrats. So since I believe that will be the focus of most of what we're talking about today, I'd like to go ahead and give you the opportunity to prove to these people just how nonpartisan you are in your criticism of American politicians. Though admittedly, I believe, Greg, you lean a little bit left. You're sure no fan of the Democrats. You've done plenty of investigative reporting about, for example, the Clintons.
The Clinton conspiracy, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm certainly no friend of the Democratic Party or Barack Obama or the rest of the gang. In fact, look, one of my major sources of busting open the story of how the election's being stolen is by one of John McCain's most enthusiastic supporters, former prosecutor David Iglesias, a good Republican, an enthusiastic supporter of John McCain, who says that his party's gone on a rampage to illegally knock out hundreds of thousands of legal voters, and that it's gone to the point where, he considers them renegades who've taken control of his party through a kind of electoral and political coup d'etat, but Karl Rove and the rest of the gang there. And, in fact...
well, that's where I know that name, isn't it?
With Bobby Kennedy, and besides the comic book, Steal Back Your Vote, we are today coming out with a story in Rolling Stone on the theft of the election. Now, Bobby's obviously a Democrat. He's, Kennedy true blue and through.
This guy Iglesias, wasn't he one of the U.S. attorneys that got fired over this stuff?
Yeah, but listen, he's given me a new charge, which he's willing to say on camera in my BBC reports, which you can also see at gregpalast.com or stealbackyourvote.org. Iglesias said that he was given 100 names by the GOP, basically, and more of this ACORN stuff, people registered by ACORN, when he was prosecutor, to go find fraudulent voters. Here's the ACORN list. Here's 100 of their fraudulent voters.
Wait, rewind a second. Tell us about ACORN. We know that the right, this is a big talking point in the McCain campaign right now, is ACORN this, ACORN that. They're responsible for the housing crisis and for a bunch of voting fraud and all kinds of stuff. Who's ACORN?
ACORN is the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. Basically, they've always been kind of a Clinton Democratic Party front. I mean, if they, I know these people, they're nice people, but they are a front, no question.
Okay.
Using George Soros's money to register 1 million people.
Like in Serbia and Georgia.
Yeah. So no question. I mean, they are affiliates of the Democratic Party. They help make Clinton president. Now, however, it's one thing to say that they're partisan. It's another to say that they're registering fraudulent voters. They've registered over 1 million voters, and the truth is that they've paid people with Soros's money mostly to register folks, and so they get a couple bucks for each name. So some people have padded those rolls with their paycheck by putting in phony names like Mickey Mouse and Mary Poppins. However, I can tell you that we don't have a single case of a fraudulent ACORN-registered voter voting. Mickey Mouse has not shown up to vote. There's no rodents in the polls that are voting.
So what Mickey Mouse did was he donated some money. Is that right?
After all, remember, Eisner's a Republican. But who is the head of the Mickey Mouse empire.
Oh,
but
sure.
The thing is that
Mickey
they haven't shown up to vote. So, and we even went further. So we went to David Iglesias, the former U.S. prosecutor, Republican, John Ashcroft protege. And he said, look, they gave me, they being a guy named Pat Rogers, who's the head of the anti-ACORN, anti-fraud Republican operation, got 100 names. He went all over the mesas of New Mexico with the FBI, and out of over 100 names, he didn't find a single fraudulent voter, not one. And here's the deep evil. And I put it in stealbackyourvote fired because he refused to prosecute people anyway. They wanted to literally prosecute innocent voters. In other words, you take some like they had one woman, a waitress in outside of Albuquerque, whose signature, she had two different signatures on her registration form. Two registration forms, two signatures. So it looked like she's letting someone use her name to vote a second time. As it turns out, she put in a second form because the first was not confirmed, which is legal, but then she signed one form on a table and one form in her hand. They wanted him to prosecute people like her, charge her with a federal crime of voter fraud, which is like hard time, 5 years in prison. And then they would, of course, facing that, would plead guilty to some, Class B misdemeanor, pay a $100 fine, and go away. And then therefore they could run out and say, look, confessed fraudulent voters registered by ACORN. He refused to arrest innocent people, and he said for that reason he was fired by Karl Rove.
All right, now let me stop you right there. That's clearly quite a bit removed from the American ideal, that you would have one political party in power that would use their Justice Department to criminalize people for, trying to support the other party, to use criminal law, to make it almost impossible for, the only competition to be able to effectively compete. My question is, though, however, how unprecedented is this in American history? Clearly, in my lifetime, I don't think Reagan did this against Mondale or something, but going back further, is this really that out of the ordinary, Greg?
Well, we did prevent black people from voting for 100 years after the Civil War. We've had Jim Crow, which was a Democratic Party operation. We've had Jose Crow for a long time. And it wasn't until 1946 that Native Americans even officially got the right to vote in America. So, and the Voting Rights Act was 65. We have a long history of not allowing people to vote. In fact, registration of voters was created to prevent Catholics from voting. The new immigrants coming in.
Really? I didn't know that.
Who became citizens. Yeah, I spoke to Alex K-Star of Harvard University, and has expert on the history of this stuff. I mean, why do we even have registration of voters? It's a bogus concept right at the front of it, because we don't have, in the state of South Dakota where there is no registration, like they say, we don't have dead people walking in to vote. We don't have people voting twice. We don't have any of that stuff terrible things are supposed to happen. But we've all accepted registration as so important. And the Republicans have now added this scare that there are 5 million illegal aliens and others voting, registered, and voting for the Democrats. And they cannot find them. So why are they doing it? If there's no such crime, I mean, literally there are 24 people who were convicted over a 4-year period of federal voting fraud. 24 people in 4 years. Come on, that's 6 people a year. The answer is because the hysteria, and this is what we talk about in Steal Back Your Vote in the comic book, the hysteria has created this cover to allow the Republicans to put in anti-fraud measures, including massive purging of voter rolls, new ID requirements, which are bogus, this idea that you have to be verified that you are who you are. If it's Scott Horton Jr. somewhere in some government record, but Scott Horton on the voter rolls, your vote is toast. If they don't like your ID because it's a student ID and not a regular government ID, your vote is toast. And in Indiana, we had a congresswoman who was denied the right to vote because her congressional ID does not have an expiration date on it, which is kind of interesting. So she couldn't vote. You have this endless game, and they know who's whacked by these, especially new voters. That if you mail in your ballot, one of the things we say in Steal Back Your Vote, one of the pieces of advice is don't go postal. Most new voters don't realize that if you vote now for the first time, if you mail in your ballot, you've got to include a photocopy of your government ID that matches your name. If you don't, your vote is gone.
Hey, is that true?
You've got to include that in a special envelope that's separate from your ballot envelope.
Oh, really? You have to send in two. Now, wait a minute. Does that count in Oregon? Because I have a friend in Oregon who says that all their voting is by mail there.
Oregon is a very unusual situation where the Secretary of State said to our team that she has nightmares that other states will go to mail-in. And the reason is Oregon has a kind of social contract that every vote gets counted. So, for example, if you mail in your ballot in Oregon, without the proper internal ID form, they will contact you. They'll call you, they'll send you a note, and they'll contact you before the election saying, you need to correct this. There's no other state that does that. So in other words, in Texas, you've got a great gotcha where you mail in your ballot without your proper ID. You will probably get a letter a week after the election telling you your ballot was discarded because. Or you may not get a note at all and you may never know it. But the last thing they're going to do is tell you, hey, you made a mistake, come in and fix it. They don't want your vote. They don't want you to vote. They've already stolen your vote by these methods, and that's why we say, steal it back.
All right, now, how much of this is because of the Help America Vote Act that was passed as a reaction to the crisis of the year 2000?
Well, Help America Vote, we have George Bush helping us vote. And, good luck. Yeah, it's not a natural disaster. Let's not talk about the disaster, fiasco, whatever. It was the theft of Florida in 2000 by the Republican Party, by Jeb Bush and Katherine Harris and her predecessor. And supposedly to prevent that from happening again, they passed this law, Help America Vote. In fact, what it did was it fluoridated the entire United States. It took Katherine Harris's method of computerizing the voter rolls and purging them of suspect voters, in her case, fake felons, who were just black people, who were guilty of voting all blacks, not guilty of anything, and having every state do that. So the state of Colorado, for example, has purged 1 in 5 voters off the voter roll. And when we ask the state of Colorado to explain what the hell they've done, we have, it's like there is no answer from them. They refused to talk to me. I even flew to Denver. They wouldn't let me in their office to even talk to them for Rolling Stone or BBC television. They won't explain why they removed 1 in 5 voters, which is 10 times what the other states have done.
Well, now this is even making
the number one swing state in America is Colorado. That is, the election is going to be decided, it's going to be stolen in Colorado, stolen in Nevada, stolen in New Mexico, and stolen once again in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
There's your 4 states.
All right, well,
write it down.
Colorado, New Mexico, Florida, and which?
Nevada.
Ohio? Nevada. Mm-hmm. Well, talk to me about New Mexico, because I remember that this got quite a bit of coverage in your book, Armed Madhouse, about how basically if you're an American Indian or if you're a Mexican, you're out of there. And in fact, you talked about how Bill Richardson, the Democratic governor of New Mexico, former presidential candidate in last year's primary season, or earlier this year's too, that he actually cooperated with the Republicans in purging all these Democrats, or at least helped cover it up, because they were a different faction of Democrats that threatened his power within that party.
And they're still doing it. Richardson was just sued a couple weeks ago by the Brennan Center for Justice. The Democrats, if Obama loses the election because New Mexico is stolen, it will have been stolen by Democrats. Part of our story in Rolling Stone magazine, and that, which was not played up because neither Rolling Stone nor my good co-author were all that excited about bringing out the fact that the Democrats stealing the vote there. But that's what's happening. I went to the Acoma Native Pueblo, and 300 Native Americans try to register. Their registrations were disappeared. Then they were given, so they went to vote. They were given these bogus provisional ballots. But provisional ballots require an official envelope. But they weren't given the envelope. So their ballots were thrown out because they didn't have the envelopes by the same officials who wouldn't give them the envelope. And they were all Democrats that threw out the Native American votes. And the Native Americans vote as strongly Democratic as African Americans. So it's Democrats who are wiping out Democrats. It doesn't matter that, except that it's of course, on the national ticket, it's Obama that gets it in the neck. And people say, why would Democrats steal Democratic votes? Ask Mayor Daley. Mayor Daley didn't steal votes from Republicans. He stole votes from other Democrats. There are no Republicans in the city of Chicago. Vote theft is, like all politics, is local, and it's class war. It's class war. And that's what's happening here. The plutocrats and the permanent elite making sure that no one else is allowed in the system to take away their ability to ring the cash register. And it doesn't matter. Republican and Democrat is not an issue in election theft. The thing is that in this election, unlike, say, in prior years when the Democrats kept out all black voters, this year they want black voters. So this year, it's the Democratic Party which is most at the national ticket, which is going to take the hit from this complete Republican con game, utter fraud.
Wow, it's really incredible. You know, when I was a kid, I had a really great social studies teacher in 5th grade, and he taught us about how when he was a kid, it was Jim Crow. Colored bathrooms and colored water fountains and no rights to vote and white primaries. And he taught us about the white primaries. Well, you're free. You can vote in the election. But the thing is, this is a one-party Democratic state, and the Democratic Party itself is privately owned, and they have their own rules, and so you're not allowed in. And so basically all the elections were decided in the primary. The general election didn't matter at all.
Yeah, I mean, understand that, again, because there are parts of Texas which are all Democratic, and therefore the Democrats have reasons to knock out the Democrats that would take away their power. And so this is one of the big issues, is that it is about the right to vote of the underclass in America. And that's who's getting it in the neck. That's who's being harmed by these new rules to prevent voter fraud. As an expert, Lorraine Menenti from Columbia University said, voter fraud, the cry of voter fraud is itself a fraud. I spoke to Tova Wang, who is the advisor to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, who wrote a report, basically, and as she put it in summary, the chance of a voter committing fraud is less than the chance of a voter being hit by lightning. And her report was turned on its head to say that there was a massive wave of potential voting criminals. They kept her name on it and then went to court to try to get a gag order to stop her from saying they changed the conclusion and the evidence in my report. And who did that? Remember I told you that the Colorado Secretary of State knocked off 1 in 5 voters. Well, the chairwoman, Bush appointed the Catherine Harris of Colorado, named Danetta Davidson, appointed her chairwoman of the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, where she could become, show all the states how to purge. In fact, he was going to call her the Purging General, but Karl Rove didn't like that. That's a joke from the comic book. Steal back your vote.
Yeah, and it is a good comic book. I got to say, I love Ted Rall. It's too bad. I don't think that George Bush himself is depicted in here in his pink general's uniform, but that's my favorite character of his. Well, now, so give me some more examples of this. You talk about it in this comic book, Steal Back Your Vote, the League of Women Voters, and how the Help America Vote Act says, if you have the slightest mistake here, the slightest mistake there, the fine is incredible. And we're not talking about deliberate fraud. We're talking about the slightest mistakes on the voter rolls that basically the game is to bankrupt anybody who's actually trying to go out there and do voter drives and recruit new people to come to the polls.
That's right. So what happened was that, came in with the states like Florida, which made it brutally expensive. You make any little mistake and you got these fines, even criminal charges brought against you if you brought in a form too late. So some lady had to go to her cousin's wedding and didn't bring it in 48 hours, or they filled out the forms wrong, and you get fined. Originally it was like $50,000. Now they brought it down to $5,000. The result was that the League of Women Voters got out of the vote registration game in some places because it's too risky for their individuals. That's why ACORN ended up as the kind of sole mass voter registration organization. It used to be the League of Women Voters and other groups like that, but they can't afford that. So Soros said, go do whatever you do and I'll write the check. But, so unfortunately that's the result. The result is that we lose the kind of nonpartisan groups, and so, in fact, in a way, I still say, good for ACORN because at least they stepped in to try to overturn a virtual criminalizing of voter registration.
Wow. Well, it really is amazing. I guess especially the U.S. attorneys all being fired. That angle on this, that's the kind of thing that, well, I don't know. I guess in any normal year that would be a huge scandal, but it's just been buried under. There's so much other news about torture and aggressive wars, and maybe more wars to come, and now a new Cold War with Russia, and the U.S. attorney scandal. Which one was that again?
Yeah, exactly. So we got plenty of scandals to choose from, but I think the U.S. attorney scandal to me was the keystone. if you understand it. It's misunderstood. It's not about politicizing the office of U.S. Attorney. I mean, my God, Rudy Giuliani was U.S. Attorney. It's the most political office out. So no one's that's meaningless to say, oh, the Republicans try to politicize the office. What was dangerous and not reported, what Iglesias was saying, is that these U.S. attorneys, almost all of them Republicans, simply refused to go along with a criminal scheme to illegally charge voters with voter fraud. And for example, when they fired Bud Cummins of Arkansas and put in Karl Rove's protege, Tim Griffin, as U.S. attorney, what that was about, everyone said, oh, that's what they can go after Hillary Clinton if she becomes the presidential candidate. Absolutely not. That's not what it was about. That's not what it was about at all. It was about going after ACORN, which is based in Little Rock. See, so it was about setting up to basically destroy any attempts at voter registration.
All right. Now, I'm not the expert in electoral politics, and frankly, I don't think we should have any. But anyway, what I understand now is that...
Well, obviously, you and Karl Rove have something in common. He doesn't believe in electoral politics either.
Well, it's a pretty vague agreement there, semantics. But here's the thing, though. My understanding, Greg, and I don't know how well you keep up with this stuff either, but my understanding is that basically right now Obama has 250, according to the polls, the opinion polls, 250 electoral votes locked up. He needs 273 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that McCain has to win every single one of the swing states to win this election. Obama needs one of them, and that every one of those swing states is now leaning toward Obama, some of them pretty heavily even toward the line of not even being considered swing states anymore. So could it really be that there would be enough criminality and fraud and purged voters and people turned away and handed these bogus provisional ballots and all these things that it could really make the difference in this election, as apparently it did in the last couple?
First, it makes a difference in our democracy. I mean, one thing I will say is that they can't steal all the votes all the time. So, as we saw in 2006, where there was actually massive vote suppression, illegal vote suppression, but Democrats took control of Congress. So whether you like that outcome or not, at least, it does say that vote suppression can be overwhelmed. The other thing is that there's more than the presidency on the ticket. You've got a pretty stiff races in Texas, which is an electoral cesspool in terms of vote suppression. And so we're very concerned. I should also say that despite all, Obama should not have to worry about Colorado or New Mexico or Nevada because of the changed demographics of those states. But he's having to fight it out. Again, I'm not an Obama supporter, but I don't think he should lose it. I feel like David Iglesias, who's a big fan of John McCain, but he says, but not on the other hand, I don't want McCain stealing my state, or he doesn't believe McCain's doing it, but he's accusing Pat Rogers, the Republican Party counsel. He's accusing Karl Rove of stealing New Mexico for John McCain. He says, I want McCain to win it, but fair and square.
Yeah, well, that's kind of rare to have that sort of integrity in a Republican, nowadays?
Or in a Democrat.
Yeah, for that matter.
Come on. Integrity is not a word that gets a lot of work out in. I guess the word gets worked out, but not the moral muscle.
Yeah,
so that's why. Look,
a lower level operative like that, I could expect to have some kind of integrity from either party, but not that they would stay for long with that.
Yeah, well,
kind of
the thing is, there are good people around. The Secretary of State of California, I'm very impressed with her, Deborah Bowen, and.
Well, wait, isn't she the one who's purged more than anybody out there in California?
Well, what happened was, her predecessor purged 42% of the new registrants. You're talking like 100,000 people were purged. When I say purged, they weren't even allowed on the voter rolls, let alone purged. Like 42% of new registrants in California, because he used something called, again, under the Help America Vote Act, said, if your name doesn't match perfectly some crazy government record, we're not putting your name on. And that meant people with names like Muhammad, who's, where the clerks in these government offices write down their names 4 different ways. People with hyphenated names. I mean, it was overwhelmingly, as we point out in the comic book, it was Vietnamese, Islamic names, hyphenated Hispanic names, names that the clerks in these offices aren't used to, and so they screwed up, and then the voter loses their vote, which is brand new. Before, the government used to apologize for making the mistake. Now they say, you cannot vote because we made a mistake.
Yeah, and little things like hyphens.
So she's trying to straighten it out, but, she's not going to be able to straighten it out by November 4th.
Yeah. Well, this even made the Washington Post, I think, last week, that across the country these states have purged tens of thousands of people at least, and that the federal government is even coming in now and saying, hey, you can't do that. You're past the deadline for doing that and these kinds of things.
Well, yes. What they're doing is that they're not supposed to purge anyone within 90 days. But Colorado, which they were showing had purged tens of thousands of people at the last minute. They did this in 2004, by the way. They purged 70,000 people, Colorado, days before the election, which is, again, illegal. They said it was an emergency. As far as I can tell, the emergency is that, the Republicans are neck and neck. That seems, in the polls. So, the Democrats have literally put in at least 100,000 new names into Colorado and New Mexico, wiping out Republicans on registration. The thing is, what the Democrats aren't looking at, the national Democrats running these drives aren't looking at, is that they're purging at the same rate, so that there's no net gain to the Democrats. And they're not aware of it. They don't know about it. In fact, there's a Democratic governor in Colorado, despite a Republican Secretary of State. The Democratic governor didn't even know about the mass purging. So now he's holding hearings, but the hearings are going to begin on November 19th.
Oh, great.
It's like, huh? So there you go. So, like I say, they've stolen it, steal it back. I don't care who you vote for. I just want your vote to count. Go to stealbackyourvote.org. The 6 ways of stealing the election, the 7 ways you can steal it back.
Well, now, hold on a second. I want to ask you to address these computerized voting machines here.
Okay.
I know this was part of the Vote America Act, and you've emphasized throughout the years that don't get too distracted by these computerized things. That's not really where the game is. The game is purging the rolls.
Yeah. I don't want people to get the wrong idea that I've suddenly endorsed computerized voting, because computerized voting is disastrous. But though most of the shenanigans of computers, by the way, do not happen as people imagine, Hollywood style, where some genius hacks in and changes the votes by hacking in. Most of the mess up, most of the disaster on computer voting, most of the election theft is very simple. You unplug it. Basically, the machine, you make sure the machine glitches, doesn't work, doesn't happen, screws up, doesn't record, doesn't save to the. This is Diebold's favorite, is that they don't save, the memory sticks don't save all the votes. So when you hit the save, just like if you were writing something, it's like any computer program, right? So it's just that it happens to be very, very, very easy to make something go glitch in precincts you don't like. No one has to know your vote. If you tell me your zip code, I'm telling you your vote. I know how you voted. That's how it works. You vote like the guy next door.
Right. That's they've broken this down to a science even better than how they pick juries now.
Yeah. So, so they know. They know where so machines break down. They happen to always break down the same hood. Mm-hmm. In New Mexico, we did a statistical analysis, found out that Hispanics tend to have their votes lost due to computer error 6 times as often as white. Now, is that because they're stupid? No. Or that they don't know how to use computers? No. It's just that they're given crap machines just like they're given crap schools and crap hospitals. In fact, one thing I found interesting is that the voters that most got crushed in New Mexico were poor whites in the rural areas, like the really dirt poor ranchers. So it's really more class than even race. It's just that it's easier for us to notice and profile the race issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the computerized thing really jumps out at people because they may never have heard of the preemptive purging of the rolls and all that kind of stuff. But just on its face, you got to figure if there's a box full of paper ballots, even if people want to fight about it and argue hanging chads and all these things, at least there's something that exists there in time and space that people can look at. But how do you how do you do a recount on a computer except hit enter again and say, well, there's the number?
Yeah, I know. Like the state of Florida required that all votes be subject to recount. So on a computer, it means that you just rerun the mistake, or rerun the fix.
Well, you know, there's a perfect solution to this that's been around for a long time. In fact, back in, I think, 2003, I interviewed an expert from Rice University who had gone with a couple others, I think, from MIT and what have you, and they had gone through and looked at the code for, I don't know if it was Diebold or one of the competitors. One of them had released the code, and they said, you know, they looked right at it with their, you know, computer genius eyeballs. They could see all the holes in the code just looking right at it on the page.
Why do we need a computer to vote? I mean, we're not talking launching the space shuttle here. We're talking about, you know, picking the school board.
Right. Well, but, you know, people who are, you know, into fancy technology and whatever, what are you going to do? You can't talk them out of it. But there's a perfect solution, which this guy, I forget his name, I'm sorry, from Rice University pointed out. They have a thing in Brazil where you do the computerized vote, and then it fills out a ballot for you and shows it to you through a little window. And if you agree that it filled out your ballot correctly, you hit one button, it drops it in the box. If you don't agree, it drops it in the shredder right in front of your eyes, and it lets you start over again. And so that way, you can have your instant results for all your media people who must know right now, but you can also go back and double check.
Well, yeah, I mean, in Venezuela, they also have the printing computer ballot. There's no reason, we all have printers, there's no reason why I can't both tally electronically and print out a ballot that drops into a box. I mean, it's just not that, you know, here's my ballot, and then you don't, people when they say receipt, you don't want to walk out with your receipt. There's nothing you can do with that. But what you do is it prints, you like the way it prints, you stick it in the box. Anyone challenges it, you can crack the box and compare it to the electronic total. Of course, it raises the question, like, then why even bother with the electronic total?
Of course.
You know, so there are ways, by the way, not one of the problems you've run into is that, like in New Mexico, where they did, Bill Richardson moved to a printed ballot, and he runs around saying, look, I've saved our election system by having a printed ballot. Well, Mr. Richardson, how come 1 in 9 Democrats were missing from the voter rolls in the primary? And, you know what, I have an answer to that. Maybe because Bill Richardson was running for president, and the people whose names were missing from the voter rolls weren't exactly Richardson voters. You know, and you know, let's call it the way it is. Bill Richardson was trying to steal that election, except he did so badly that he couldn't get away with it.
Wow, all right. So
and, you know, but the problem is that now Obama's going to have to face the purged voter roll that Richardson left him.
Well,
see, that's what's going on here.
In a way, it serves him right for being a member of the same crime ring. Let me ask you. Let me ask you to go through the 7 steps here, real quick.
Okay.
Number one.
Then I've got to go to fight the dragon.
Oh, you say you got no time?
Well, I'll just go through let's go through 7 steps quickly. Okay.
Real quick.
And the best thing to do, of course, is get the Steal Back Your Vote guide. It's nonpartisan, so you can bring it to the polls and rip out that one page. There's physical copies you can get in bulk. We're sending a whole bunch to Houston, by the way. Physical copies you can get in bulk, or just if you donate at least a penny, you can download it. But number one, don't go postal. Don't mail in your ballot. You know, that there's too many ways for them to play games. We've discussed that. Second, register and register. You don't know if you're registered. You think you're registered. You better check it out and know what name you're registered on, where you're supposed to be voting. Third, vote early and vote often. What we mean by that is don't wait for Election Day, because you've really got to, if there's a problem with your vote, you don't want to know while there's a line of 90, after you've waited 2 hours and there's a line of 90 people behind you. You want to know by going in and voting early, in person. Then, let's see, what else do we have there? You probably have the comic in front of you. Let me go take a look at the comic book.
Well, I have it right here, and this goes along with vote early in case there's a problem, and that is refuse a provisional ballot. Bring your ID. Make sure that some young punk Republican Party goofball isn't going to be able to stand there and challenge your right to vote that day.
Right. Yeah, they're going to tell you take a provisional ballot. Don't accept it. Call the 800 number that we have. You want an adjudication that you have the right to a ballot, not a bogus baloney ballot. Mm-hmm. And then we have something called Occupy Ohio and Invade Nevada. Number 5, what that means is that participate. You vote early, take care of your vote, and then help someone else vote by working that day as a poll worker, as a poll watcher, as someone helping get out the vote, as someone helping people get the information. Number 6, we call it Data Voter.
Yeah, bring a sexy party with you.
Jesse Jackson says arrive with 5, but one of the things we throw in there is bring ID. And I know that I'm going to have a lot of voting rights attorneys saying, you don't need ID in every case. I know that. But you know what? If the little lady in the rhinestone glasses behind the desk says, You need an ID or I'm not letting you vote. I'm going to give you a provisional ballot. You want to argue with her? I wouldn't. You better bring every ID you can think of, and including government ID, and it has to match your voter name. It shouldn't have to match your address, but I would suggest you do that anyway. This is basic protection. And finally, number 7 is make the democracy demand. The most important day is not November 4th, Tuesday, but Wednesday the 5th. If they're not, you demand that they count all the ballots. Go stay with us at stealbackyourvote.org. If they're not counting the ballots, we'll be there to, while the rest of the media is covering the count, we're going to cover the no count.
Right.
And so go to stealbackyourvote.org on Election Day and the day after to see what's happened. And, if all you're concerned about is whether Obama does or doesn't get elected or suddenly Ron Paul write-ins put him over the top.
Wouldn't that be great?
What would happen is, well, let's put it this way. It's like I'm much more concerned that the process of democracy survives here. I mean, that might sound corny, but that's about all the. If we don't have it, well, you already see what happens. The price of not having an elected government is the city of New Orleans drowns, and thousands are dead in Iraq, and that's the price of an unelected government.
Yeah, and particularly as we move into an era of economic catastrophe and more blowback from our foreign occupations and so forth, we really don't want to have a dictatorship here, do we? It's
kind of frightening. As I've said before, right now we have an unelected junta in charge, and you see the results. They don't do too well. Like Musharraf or any of these unelected dictators, their arrogance is deadly costly because they feel that they do not have to face the electorate. That's the danger. That's the danger. Not that the electorate's all that bright, but compared to the unelected leadership, I'll take the American public.
Yeah. All right, everybody. That's Greg Palast echoing Thomas Jefferson there.
Nice echo. Okay, catch
the
you
website
later,
is
Scott.
GregPalast.com, stealbackyourvote.org. You can find it's the new comic book, Steal Back Your Vote.